Mr. Flintstone isn't home yet. Is there any message?
Will you please give him my measurements?
Your what?
My measurements.
Your measurements? Well, okay, let's have them.
In July 2024, Fox canceled a brand new sequel for Flintstones show before a single episode ever reached your screen, and nobody said a word about it. Without outrage, headlines, or petitions. Just complete, eerie silence. And that silence is not indifference. That silence is a verdict. Because what happened to the Flintstones is not really a story about a cancellation. It is a story about how one perfectly constructed show was taken apart, piece by piece, over 60 years, not by enemies, but by every single person who claimed to love it. The show that cannot come back. Let us begin in the present, where the real wound is. In 2024, Fox greenlit a brand new adult animated series called Bedrock. The premise was smart and genuinely interesting. Elizabeth Banks was cast as a grown-up Pebbles Flintstone, now an adult woman navigating a world on the cusp of the Stone Age, becoming the Bronze Age. The idea was to use the franchise to explore what happens when a civilization is about to be forced to change everything it has ever known. It had real writers. It had real budget. It had real ambition. Fox canceled it before a single episode aired. This was not the first time. In 2011, Seth MacFarlane pitched an adult Flintstones revival to Fox. They announced it publicly, set a premiere date, and produced 10 minutes of completed animation. Then an executive read one of the scripts, said he liked it, but did not love it, and the project was dead. MacFarlane later explained why it collapsed. He said he could not figure out a way to make Fred Flintstone feel different enough from Peter Griffin. The man who created Family Guy could not find enough creative distance between his own lead character and the cartoon caveman that inspired the entire genre 60 years earlier. Fred Flintstone had been so thoroughly copied that bringing him back had become an act of self-plagiarism before you wrote a single line. Peter Griffin descends from Homer Simpson. Homer Simpson descends from Archie Bunker. Archie Bunker descends from Ralph Kramden of the Honeymooners. And Ralph Kramden is exactly who Fred Flintstone was built to be. The Flintstones started a chain reaction that produced every loud, lovable, bumbling husband on television for the next 6 decades, and looped back so completely that the original link has been swallowed entirely. To understand how it happened, you need to go back to the very beginning. To a pitch meeting that almost did not happen. To a show built on a creative contradiction that would take 6 years to fully detonate. But here is the angle nobody gives you. Every person who helped build the Flintstones into an icon also made a decision that chipped away at what made it great. This is not a story about villains. It is a story about reasonable people making reasonable choices that collectively destroyed something remarkable. The show that was never supposed to exist. On September 30, 1960, ABC aired something television had genuinely never seen before. A fully produced, adult animated sitcom in prime time. Not on Saturday morning, not tucked into a children's slot. Friday night at 8:30 p.m., competing directly against live-action network dramas with real casts and real budgets. Getting there had been humiliating. Joseph Barbera had spent weeks pitching to every network and sponsor in New York City and had been turned away at every door. Then, on what he called the absolute last day, he walked into ABC. They said yes. The show very nearly had a completely different name. The original title was The Flagstones, which was blocked by a name conflict with the comic strip High and Lois. The Gladstones did not clear either. The Flintstones was the third attempt. The family that would define animated television history was named almost by accident. The characters themselves nearly looked completely different. Lead animator Ed Benedict's original designs depicted genuinely prehistoric cave people, scraggly and hunched with long matted beards. Barbera rejected them outright. He told Benedict to straighten the characters up, make them clean-cut, readable, at the small frame sizes that 1960 television demanded. Details like Fred's necktie and Wilma's stone necklace were added in the final push to make the characters feel specific rather than generic. The show's entire premise was, by William Hanna's own public admission, directly modeled on The Honeymooners, Jackie Gleason's 1950s CBS sitcom about a loud New York bus driver. His endlessly patient wife and his goofy upstairs neighbor was the template for everything. Fred was Ralph Cramden. Barney was Ed Norton. The physical design of Fred Flintstone, the heavy build and the expressive face, was built to evoke Gleason himself. Gleason knew. His lawyers told him he very likely had a real legal case. And then he let it go. Henry Corden, who would later become the second voice of Fred Flintstone, explained why. Gleason's lawyers had posed a simple question. Did he really want to be known as the man who yanked Fred Flintstone off the air? The answer was no. One man's vanity, or perhaps his decency, gave the world 60 years of bedrock. Then there is the catchphrase, "Yabba Dabba Doo" was never written in any script. The original line was simply Yahoo, which Alan Reed found flat during an early recording session. Reed's son later explained that his father had been inspired by a British hair product jingle, "A little dab will do ya," and rearranged the sounds on the spot. The most recognizable thing about the most recognizable cartoon family in television history was an improvised accident. The sponsor who wrote the checks that made all of this possible was also quietly producing the most ethically indefensible content in the history of children's television. And the genuinely disturbing thing is that they were not hiding it. It was the last thing you saw before the credits rolled every single week. Winston tastes good, like a cartoon should. Here is something that sounds like it has to be made up. Every single episode of the Flintstones' first 2 seasons ended with Fred Flintstone personally endorsing Winston cigarettes. Not during a commercial break. Not in a generic spot that could have run on any show. In fully animated, custom-produced Flintstones content, using the real voice cast, set in bedrock, with Fred looking directly at the camera and delivering the tagline. For viewers at home in 1960, you genuinely could not tell where the episode ended and the cigarette advertisement began. That was completely intentional. Winston did not simply buy airtime. They commissioned original Flintstones animation as branded content, directed by Hanna and Barbera themselves, using the full voice cast set in bedrock, with Fred addressing the camera directly. For viewers at home, there was no clean line where the episode ended and the advertisement began. That was entirely intentional. The most widely seen spot shows Fred and Barney slipping out for a smoke, while their wives clean the house, lighting Winston's and talking about the smooth flavor before being chased back inside. The whole piece is framed as a reward that hard-working men deserve. The immediate national controversy was not about children watching a cartoon endorse a lethal product. That conversation would come later. The controversy that dominated newspapers in 1961 was about grammar. Winston's slogan used "like" as a conjunction instead of "as," and linguists, English teachers, and news anchors all weighed in. For approximately 18 months, the Winston slogan was one of the most discussed sentences in American public life. All that noise meant the more obvious problem: was barely discussed at all. Millions of children were watching Fred Flintstone endorse cigarettes every Friday night. The show had not been designed for children. It was conceived, pitched, and sold as an adult prime-time comedy. But the slapstick worked for every age. The warmth of the characters worked for every age. Parents were watching with their children, and the show was funny enough that millions of households had made it a Friday night ritual. The children in those households watched Fred tell their parents, and implicitly themselves, that Winston tasted good. And nobody in any position of authority was yet prepared to say out loud what that actually meant. In 1999, Advertising Age ranked the Winston jingle the 8th best of the entire 20th century. A campaign built on grammatical controversy and animated cigarette endorsements, reaching millions of children, placed in the top 10 of 100 years of American advertising. The toll on the voice cast deserves mention. Alan Reed, who voiced Fred and delivered those Winston taglines for 2 full seasons, died of emphysema in 1977. Henry Corden, who replaced Reed and voiced Fred for nearly 3 more decades, also died of emphysema in 2005. 2 men who played the same character both died of the disease most associated with the product that character endorsed. Bayi Benaderet, who voiced Betty Rubble, was diagnosed with lung cancer in 1967 and died the following year at 62. There is one more piece to this chapter that almost no one has reported. In 1967, a full year after the Flintstones had been canceled and repositioned entirely as children's entertainment, a 19-minute animated Flintstones film was produced promoting Busch beer. It was made for distribution to beer wholesalers and was never broadcast publicly. The family that had spent 2 seasons selling cigarettes to adults and then been rebranded as wholesome children's heroes was still being used behind closed doors to sell alcohol. The contradiction that defined the show from its very first episode never actually went away. It just moved somewhere the public could not see it. The event that finally ended the Winston era was not a congressional hearing, not a public boycott, and not a single moment of moral reckoning. It was a phone call from a toy salesman. And the decision made in that single conversation did not just change the sponsor. It changed the entire identity of the show, permanently and irreversibly. The phone call that changed everything. Going into Season 3, the writers had already decided Fred and Wilma were going to have a baby boy. Joseph Barbera had personally written the promotional tagline, "A chip off the old Flintstone." The story was mapped out. The network was on board. The scripts were in development. Then the phone rang. The caller was from the show's merchandising division. He had heard about the baby storyline. He asked one question. Was it going to be a boy or a girl? Barbera told him it was going to be a boy. There was a pause. Then the merchandising executive told him he had the ideal toy already lined up, but it would only work if the baby was a girl. Barbera's response was immediate, and by his own later account, completely unconflicted. He said it was a girl. 3 million Pebbles Flintstone dolls sold within the first few months of her debut on screen. A baby whose entire existence, whose gender, whose name, whose personality were all shaped by a conversation about toy profit margins, became one of the most commercially successful animated characters in the show's history before her first season was even finished. But the real consequence of Pebbles arriving had almost nothing to do with merchandise revenue. The moment a baby appeared on screen, something that had always been quietly and uncomfortably true about the Flintstones became impossible for anyone to keep ignoring. This was a family program. Children were watching in enormous numbers, and Winston cigarettes, a product that existed entirely for adults, and could not legally be sold to children, could no longer stay on a show that millions of children now watched as their primary Friday night entertainment. The Winston sponsorship ended. Welch's grape juice came in to replace it. The contrast could not have been more deliberate. Out went a product that killed people slowly. In came one that parents handed their children at breakfast. The adult animated sitcom that had launched on the strength of cigarette endorsements was now, officially and for the rest of its life, a children's show. The transformation was complete. What had started as a primetime comedy for grown-ups had become something else entirely, because a single phone call about a single toy deal had rewritten the story before the writers even knew it was happening. The Flintstones was also doing something no animated series had attempted before. Wilma's pregnancy was depicted across multiple episodes, from the announcement through the birth. Before Pebbles, cartoon babies arrived by stork as a shorthand that avoided the subject entirely. For 1963, that was genuinely bold storytelling. John Vanderpyle, who voiced Wilma Flintstone from 1960 until her death in 1999, put it simply, Fred was a yahoo who made her angry all the time, but underneath everything they genuinely loved each other, and that real complicated romance was the core of the show's appeal. It was a marriage that felt lived in, full of friction and warmth in equal measure, and audiences recognized something true in it. When the show trusted that relationship, it was almost always great. When it stopped, things went wrong. The show also addressed something American television had essentially never touched. Betty and Barney could not have biological children. Rather than quietly dropping the plot, the writers had the Rubbles adopt Bam Bam, a supernaturally strong toddler found on their doorstep, making them the first couple in American animated television to pursue adoption as a genuine, emotionally meaningful storyline. In the middle of toy deals and sponsor changes, the writers were doing something compassionate. Most people also do not know that the theme song they have known their entire lives was not the original opening. For the first 2 seasons, the show opened with a completely different song called Rise and Shine. The theme song everyone now thinks of as definitive, Meet the Flintstones, was introduced in Season 3. The same season, Pebbles arrived. The same season, Winston left. The same season, the show stopped being what it had originally been and became something new. Even the music marked the transition. With the adult audience drifting away and the show now firmly repositioned as children's programming, the competitive television landscape was about to turn brutal. What arrived in Season 4 would expose exactly how fragile the show's hold on its remaining audience had become. And the most dramatic story from that entire period had nothing to do with television scheduling at all. The accident, the comeback, and the ratings collapse. The Flintstones ranked 18th in the Nielsen ratings in its first full season. For an untested animated series competing against established live-action dramas, that was a remarkable achievement. By Season 3, that position had slipped noticeably enough that trade publications were beginning to notice and comment. By Season 5, the show had fallen completely out of the top 60. In Season 4, ABC moved the show to Thursday nights. CBS launched The Munsters that same fall, a supernatural family sitcom with structurally identical audience appeal. And it drew viewers the Flintstones desperately needed to hold. By December, the network moved the show back to Fridays, what Variety called the sacrifice switch, after the Flintstones and Johnny Quest were found to be pulling from the same audience and effectively canceling each other out. But the most dramatic story from the entire middle period of the show had nothing to do with scheduling decisions, network politics, or sponsor negotiations. It happened on a January night in 1961, during Season 2, when Mel Blanc was driving home and was involved in a near-fatal head-on collision on Sunset Boulevard. He was placed in a full-body cast. He slipped into a coma that lasted several weeks. The doctors were not certain he would fully recover. The production could not stop. Dawes Butler filled in for 5 episodes. But when Blanc regained consciousness, Hanna-Barbera brought the entire recording operation to his hospital room, equipment, staff, and microphones arranged around his bed. He recalled it taking 16 people to record each episode. He recorded 40 episodes from the hospital and then from home while still in recovery. He refused to stop. That Barney Rubble had a consistent, recognizable voice through the show's most fragile and uncertain production period is entirely because one man, lying in a hospital bed in a full-body cast, would not let a near-fatal accident take the character away from him. That is a remarkable story, and it belongs in every conversation about what the Flintstones was and what it meant to the people who made it. By the time Season 6 arrived, the show had lost more than half of its peak audience and cycled through the best of its material. The satirical engine that had made the first 2 seasons electric was running out of fuel. And in that creative exhaustion, Hanna-Barbera made the decision that would define how the show was remembered. The character they introduced in Season 6 was designed by a writer with genuinely ambitious and philosophical intentions. What reached the screen was something else entirely. And the distance between the original vision and the finished product explains everything about why the Flintstones could never survive its final season. The Great Gazoo and the show that stopped trusting itself. On October 29, 1965, Fred and Barney discovered a crashed flying saucer in the bedrock wilderness, from which emerged a tiny green alien named the Great Gazoo. He had been exiled from a planet called Zetox for inventing a doomsday device. He could materialize objects from nothing, teleport people, freeze time, and travel through time. He called Fred and Barney dum-dums exclusively. Only Fred, Barney, young children, and animals could see him. Every other adult here assumed Fred had lost his mind. The character was created by writer Joanna Lee, one of the show's most experienced contributors. The original episode was titled The Wizard of Og, and the character was called Professor Og. Production files document at least 5 name iterations before Gazoo was settled on, derived from a 1909 novelty song called King of the Bungalows. Joanna Lee's original written description of what Gazoo was supposed to represent was genuinely ambitious. She wrote that he should function as a mirror, reflecting life's uncertainties, its vagaries, its ritual magic, and its dreary reality. She described him simply as life itself, brought home to Fred and Barney in physical form. What reached the screen had no consistent internal logic, no coherent stakes, and no resolution. Gazoo's entire arc, trying to earn his way back to Zetox by helping Fred and Barney become better people, simply stops mid-story when the series is canceled in April 1966. He never gets home. Fred and Barney never become better people. The story just ends because the show ends. Harvey Korman voiced Gazoo before The Carol Burnett Show made him a star. He later spoke about the irony of a character widely cited as a creative disaster being one of his most warmly remembered performances by fans, and he returned to the Flintstones universe 4 times across his career. The structural damage Gazoo caused was not about quality. Some Gazoo episodes were genuinely funny in isolation. The damage was about what his presence meant for the show's foundational logic. The entire Flintstones premise rested on one repeatable joke: modern life recreated in the Stone Age, with comedy generated by the gap between a prehistoric setting and 20th century anxieties. The foot-powered car was funny because everyone understood cars. The bird-operated record player was funny because everyone understood record players. Gazoo broke that logic entirely. Gazoo was a science fiction character who could solve any problem the writers needed to resolve. His presence made stakes disappear. And because only Fred and Barney could see him, every other character became a confused bystander rather than an active participant. The Simpsons understood exactly what Gazoo represented and cataloged it precisely. In Season 8, in an episode called The Simpsons Spin-Off Showcase, the writers introduced a tiny alien named Osmodiar that only Homer could see. The parody required no explanation at all. Every animation fan in the audience immediately recognized the reference, understood what it meant, and understood why it was devastating. You do not need to tell people that Gazoo was a disaster. You show them the copy and let the recognition do the work. Gazoo's final episode aired in the spring of 1966. A few weeks later, the entire show joined him in cancellation. And what Hanna-Barbera did in the months that followed proved that they had been planning for this outcome long before ABC ever made it official. April Fool's Day, 1966. On April 1, 1966, The Flintstones aired its 166th and final episode on ABC. There was no series finale, no emotional farewell, no acknowledgement that 6 years of television history were ending. The episode aired. The credits rolled. The show was gone. For a show that had once competed for the Nielsen Top 20 and provoked a national conversation about cigarette advertising and children's media, the ending was almost invisible. That invisibility was, in its own quiet way, the most honest verdict possible. What most historians overlook is that Hanna-Barbera was not caught off guard. The Man Called Flintstone, a theatrical feature structured as a James Bond parody, was released by Columbia Pictures just 4 months after the cancellation. Impossible, unless it was already deep in production, while the series was still airing. The studio had been planning for the end. The syndication market required roughly 100 episodes to be commercially viable for resale to local stations. The Flintstones had 166. The library was worth more in syndication than a struggling primetime series was worth fighting to keep alive. Hanna-Barbera had understood this for some time. The 166-episode library went into syndication and became one of the most broadcast television properties in the world. Entire generations of children who had never seen a first-run episode grew up knowing Fred and Barney, as well as any character from their own era. Then came the vitamins. Flintstones vitamins, launched by Miles Laboratories and later acquired by Bayer, became one of the best-selling children's health supplements in American history. The characters who had spent 2 seasons endorsing Winston cigarettes were now appearing in pediatricians' offices telling parents their children needed adequate nutrition. The contradiction that defined the show had not resolved itself. It had simply found a new expression. The dream of returning the Flintstones to primetime as the adult comedy it was originally designed to be did not die in 1966. It has been attempted repeatedly across 6 decades, and every single attempt has revealed the same impossible truth about what Fred Flintstone actually is, and why that truth cannot be undone. The legacy that cannot be reclaimed. We started in 2024 with a cancellation nobody discussed. Now you understand why that silence carries weight. The Bedrock series was canceled by Fox in July 2024 before a single episode aired. The second consecutive adult animated Flintstones revival shelved at the same network. The pattern is too consistent to be coincidence. The Flintstones is a victim of its own foundational success in a way that has no real precedent in television history. Most canceled shows fail because they were not good enough. The Flintstones cannot come back because it succeeded so completely that it generated its own replacement, which generated its replacement through 6 decades, until the original has been so thoroughly embedded in the culture it can no longer be extracted from it. The most critically successful Flintstones revival of the past 30 years did not come from television. In 2016, DC Comics launched a 12-issue series written by Mark Russell that treated Bedrock as a society grappling with capitalism, religion, and collective grief, without softening any of it. It received Eisner Award nominations and is regularly described as the best Flintstones content since the original first 2 seasons, a 12-issue comic book that accomplished what 3 television networks, decades of Saturday morning reruns, and Seth MacFarlane could not. The reason is simple. The comic did not need sponsors, toy licenses, or vitamin brands. It could be honest about who these characters were. The original show, in its best moments, had that same freedom, because nobody yet knew what it was going to become. The whole story traces a single chain. Winston money funded the launch and gave the show its adult positioning. That positioning attracted children who loved the slapstick. The children attracted toy companies who wanted a baby girl for a doll line. The baby girl drove out the cigarette sponsor. The loss of that sponsorship changed the show's creative identity. The new identity failed to hold the adult audience. Declining ratings produced production anxiety. Anxiety produced creative desperation. Desperation produced the Great Gazoo. And on April Fool's Day 1966, it was over. Every decision in that chain was, examined in isolation, a reasonable choice. No villain made the critical call. A cigarette company wanted to sell cigarettes. A toy salesman wanted to sell toys. A network executive wanted better ratings. A writer tried to save a struggling show. Taken together, those understandable decisions dismantled the most original animated series in television history from the inside. That is the story standard retellings miss. They focus on Gazoo as the jump-the-shark moment, or on the Winston deals, or on the MacFarlane revival as proof of decline. But none of those things happened in isolation. They were all steps in the same long, slow, inevitable process. The Flintstones was not killed. It was gradually and almost lovingly disassembled. Fred Flintstone never really went off the air. He is in your medicine cabinet right now. He was on your breakfast table when you were a child. His catchphrase is so deeply embedded in the cultural language that people use it who have never seen a single episode of the show. He is everywhere, and that ubiquity is both his greatest achievement and his insurmountable problem. You cannot bring back something that never actually left. You can only keep trying and keep discovering, as Seth MacFarlane discovered, and as Fox discovered twice, that the thing you want to reclaim has already become the air that everything else breathes. If any part of this story changed the way you see the Flintstones, or if you think there is still a version of this show that could work in 2024 and beyond, drop your thoughts in the comments below.